Anthony Scheller is a seasoned cybersecurity professional. Decades-long record of success. His journey began in PwC, where he specialized in offensive security, assisting Fortune 500 companies and fortifying their defense against cyber threats through penetration testing. Transitioning into technology sector, Anthony assumed leadership roles and both technical and strategic in security engineering industry-leading companies including Hulu, Flexport, Twilio. He currently holds a position of head of security engineer at StubHub, where he focuses on maturing the security at all layers of the stack. So please welcome Anthony Scheller.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Cool. So yeah, my name is Anthony Scheller. Today we'll be talking about kind of my journey from IC to manager and then doing it all over again. So kind of how to find your place in security and kind of, I know it's a hot topic right now as far as whether you want to be an IC or go into managerial leadership. So hopefully this will kind of give some insight and hopefully help at least one person out. First, we'll go into a little bit of the agenda today, what I have in store. I'll talk a little bit of background on myself, kind of why I'm here. Then we'll talk about the one-way myth, right? We'll discuss some of the misconceptions, right, regarding career trajectories in security, as well as just, I would say, any sort of technical field where you have a split between, individuals who are engineers or technical professionals versus the managerial leadership side of things. Then after that, we'll go into kind of what it was like to move back to IC post the managerial leadership, side of things. And then we'll talk about the flip side of that, of going and becoming a leader again, and how what were some of the lessons learned during that period of transition. And then during my time at StubHub so far, right, responsibilities have changed quite a bit. Going from manager of a single team, single function, to back to an IC in technical leadership, and then from there having a lot more responsibility of multiple domains. And kind of during that time, I had some time to reflect and kind of be able to understand kind of and distill what the dilemma is right between that question of being individual contributor versus being in leadership and kind of what that looks like. Then we'll kind of close things down. Probably the most interesting part, I would say, for you guys is the lessons learned that I've had so far, so you guys don't have to. And then we'll finish off with some closing remarks. And actually one thing I did want to call out because I thought it was funny, in case for anybody who has noticed, I needed some help doing artwork, so I had ChatGPT take care of this, and as you can see, we saw the lovely hallucinations there with the individual contributor versus leadership. Thought that was funny. Decided to keep it. Who am I, right? So as I said, my name is Anthony Scheller, born and raised in Northern California, so like San Jose area. Been interested in technology and science throughout my entire life. Started programming in high school. Funny story is me and my buddies who I had met in high school, they were also into technology, and we didn't know anything at that time as far as programming goes, so we'd literally just hang out with each other in the same room and just read Stack Overflow. That's about it. That was the extent of our hangout sessions. Then after that, I came down to Southern California for undergrad. I went to Cal Poly Pomona, studied CIS, which is a mixture between computer science and business, kind of in the middle. I don't know if we have anybody from Cal Poly Pomona here, but oh, awesome. So I went back into industry after I graduated. And then ended up going back to school to get my master's at Berkeley, studying cybersecurity specifically. Then outside of all that, I love anything fast with a motor, so cars, motorcycles, side-by-sides, anything that could probably get you hurt. I'm probably interested in it. Also love cycling, right? Allows me to have some semblance of cardiovascular, abilities. So, and then right now I currently lead security engineering at StubHub. Just to hop right in, right? So, oftentimes I've heard this, right? And I thought it as well myself at the beginning of my career, like, if I want to make a real impact, I need to get into managerial leadership, right? That's where all the decisions are made. And so, yeah, like definitely is a little bit more nuanced than that. And so, yeah, we'll discuss some of the details there in a little bit. So, starting off with the one-way myth versus reality, right? Let's take a little survey of kind of some of these myths and the actual realities. So over on the left here, right, I have it broken out by myth and then the associated reality on the right-hand side. So, you know, the concept of having a linear trajectory, right, from IC to managerial leadership is probably, I'd say, one of the bigger myths, right? So say you're, a junior IC and you're working your way up to senior or staff, depending on your organization, and then that's generally speaking where the kind of paths diverge between, going down the managerial leadership track versus the, individual contributor track. And you make that switch, and then you work your way up, through the managerial leadership ranks, and you never think about it again, right? That's just kind of like the career, and I would say that's probably the most common misconception there is that it's linear, right? And so the reality is it's common, right? I think we all know that, but it's definitely not necessary or required. And as you'll see in a little bit, like I definitely took quite a bit of a winding road there for various reasons, and so we'll get into kind of that journey a little bit. And the next one, right, is once a manager, right, it's impossible to return to IC at the same leveling, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say you're going down the manager, the managerial leadership track, and you get to like senior manager, director. You're making good money, and you've become accustomed to that life cycle, and you're like, but wait, that doesn't exactly make me super happy anymore. I want to go back to being an IC. Is that possible? And so that's definitely a little bit, again, more nuanced, right? Depending on the positions that you're choosing to go back to from an individual contributor perspective. But I think the reality here, right, is that whatever effort and time you put into keeping your complementary, skill set and hone that complementary skill set is what you're going to get out of it, right? So you can have a little bit more lateral movement there. But it's definitely, again, not required. And, if you keep technical, you can definitely go back onto the other side of the track, which, again, I've done. So, but yeah, last item here, right, for the myths is that, moving from managerial leadership to IC can be looked at as a demotion by future employers. Now, I personally have never thought this, but after talking to some colleagues and some other leaders talking about, some people that they know, turns out this was actually a lot more prevalent than I had thought. So like in this case, right, let's say, you're going to like a senior manager role, and then you go back to like a senior engineer, right? Will that look negatively, right, upon, your career trajectory? Does it cause more questions than answers during like your interview process and stuff like that? And so, the only thing I would say there is the reality is like, if you get a sense of that, if you're, at your existing organization, or if you're interviewing around and, you get the sense that, the interview panels, right, are starting to ask you like questions about that, maybe it's not even necessarily worth entertaining that organization to begin with, right? Because that kind of is indicative of their internal culture there. So, but with that said, we'll go into a little bit of my career trajectory here, and kind of show some of the ways that I moved back and forth, and what are some of the lessons learned there. So, anyways, I kind of like I think I mentioned earlier, went to school in Southern California. During that time, right, I was looking for internships right during the summers. Needed a way to pay for school. Didn't know that I was actually interested in security at all. Just thought I was actually just happy to be there. Happy to be potentially going into some sort of technology-related industry. Thought I was going to be ended up in software engineering, but like I said, needed to pay for school, so I was looking for internships that paid. Pay for the next 2 years and stuff like that. So, of the internships that I got offered, there was I think like 2 that were paid, and one of them was paying more than the other, which happened to be security focused. So naturally, at that point, I took that, and so ended up interning there for 2 summers, starting at PwC for about 2 summers. Ended up starting full time after that. And it was a great experience, right? At least for having like a introduction to that, to like full-time employment, basically. I worked on like security controls assessments and offensive security kind of stuff, But given that I already had like a desire for building rather than breaking, I would say, is I definitely wanted to cut my teeth from an engineering perspective at an IC level, at least at that point in my career. So ended up making the move to Hulu as a junior IC. From there, I started, I'd say more of the basic side of things, starting with like some basic automations for our enterprise security kind of function. So things like, if there's a phishing email that has been identified, right, creating some automation that removes it from, all the Office 365 mailboxes so people don't click on stuff. And then also helped Andy, right, back there. We used to work together previously, helped him with automating some of, adding context to the security operations center findings, right, that we had. So, alert would come in and then just, gathering some more context from our other tools to, kind of give a more holistic picture of what that alert was about. But then, after that, just doing more basic stuff like that, ended up getting promoted to a senior engineer. And at this point in time at Hulu, they were very focused on scaling for our live TV efforts, right? And so because we were primarily a data center shop before then, their answer to the scalability issue was going to AWS. And so I knew absolutely nothing about cloud security, but my managerial leadership at the time was like, hey, you should probably figure this out. So ended up, I'd say falling in love again from a career perspective. I think cloud security in general kind of melds the two aspects that I personally enjoyed, which was like obviously the security portion, but also like the automation side of things because everything's API driven. And so from there, ended up, doing, I guess, decently well and providing a solid function for reducing risk in AWS. And so managerial leadership thought it would be a good idea to start building out a team around the function that I was providing. So at that point, became a tech lead of cloud security, which was a brand new team at that point, and then started moving into the managerial role side of things. And so this is around the time when Disney came in and there's a lot of like organizational shifts. And at that point I was, being, let's just say pushed to go pure play manager and basically take my hands off keyboard from a technical side of things completely. And so, I just felt like I had some unfinished business in the technical realm of things. And so that and a bunch of other, stuff that I probably shouldn't share, specifically related to Disney. It just wasn't the place I wanted to be anymore, right? So decided to move back to an individual contributor role, and after that, where I went to Flexport. So let's take a look at kind of why I went back to IC after being in management. I would say honestly, it's pretty straightforward, right? What I ended up finding is that I had a passion for technology over people and people development, right? So I could get lost in like a technical, project. I could be working on it all night, and it was like super fun. Like that's what I wanted to be doing. I didn't want to be doing anything else or hanging out with friends and so on and so forth. And so, but on the flip side of that, right, I noticed that I didn't have the same level of excitement, right, and passion for, creating a strong, team from a managerial leadership side of things, like supporting my IC's like career growth and mentorship and, analysis of like team operations, right? And, trying to make refinements in our intake processes for tickets and planning and all that stuff, all the stuff that is super important, but, I just wasn't passionate about it. So, frankly, it was taking a quality hit, which obviously is not great. And so, the next item here, right, is, full disclosure, I got pretty insecure about my technical knowledge, right? So I, knowing I needed to step back a little bit, and also I was getting external pressure to do so, to be a better managerial leader, which I totally agree I needed to, by the way. I was taking my hands off keyboard, getting farther removed from the technical implementation aspects of what my team was doing. And so, when there was technical, issues and, my team had questions, right, I used to be the person to ask. Now I was no longer as close to the technology, and so, I was no longer able to help my team in those particular, ways. And so, given also that I was like, I would say fairly early on in my career at that point, the imposter syndrome quickly set in as far as like, is this just the cap of my technical skill set, right? And like, should I go back to IC, or am I going to be respected as a leader later on if I don't continue to build my technical skill sets? And so that was another reason, right? And then, third item here is like, the perceived decrease in impact as a manager, right? So another thing that ended up happening was, as I started feeling, stepping back and I started feeling insecure about my technical skills, then I'm like, okay, I know how to fix that. I'm just going to start assigning myself some technical tasks, right, during the sprint, as like, acting like an IC, so that way I can still, get my hands dirty per se. And naturally, as you could probably guess, I over-indexed quite a bit on the fun stuff at that time that I thought was fun. And again, I was kind of back to that square one where, my managerial duties were taking a quality hit, and, at least a quality hit from my perspective. And so not good, and definitely, felt quite displaced, right? Feeling like I was supposed to be in an IC role versus the managerial role. So going back to my timeline here, went to Flexport, right? We just discussed kind of why I decided to part ways with the managerial leadership the first time. Had some fun times at Flexport on the cloud and infrastructure security team. Ended up moving literally across the street in San Francisco, even though I was remote, but the offices were literally across the street, to Twilio, again, working in the cloud security team. Had some great times there as well, built some cool stuff. And then, I had a previous, still a friend, but a previous colleague who's working at StubHub, and he's like, hey, they're trying to build out this, security engineering program from scratch. You should totally come. And I was like, I got a good thing going here at Twilio. Like, I don't really want to do that. It sounds like a lot of work. And so, but I got sold, long story short, and I'm still in that position right now. So, why did I go back to management, right? And so this is, I think one of the slides that kind of sets the stage for when kind of you're ready to go back into the managerial leadership area, or if you're ready at all. And so, like, I realized that I was, miss being the decision maker, right? So, being a senior plus IC, depending on the organizational structure, right, you should have quite a bit of impact on, the organizational like OKRs, right? For like if you're on security, right? For security. But ultimately, you're not the decision maker, right? You can make your pitch, and you can give all the reasons why that you think that an OKR should be different. We should be focusing on a different risk factor here. But ultimately, right, that decision does not lie with you, right? That's your managerial leadership's job. And of course, right, looking back, like if managerial leadership, in my opinion, is doing a good job, then like, they should obviously hear everybody out and, make very concerted efforts to kind of bring in those other educated opinions. But again, right, it's ultimately not, that decision is no longer yours to make. And, that no longer sat well with me, frankly, as far as, being a senior plus IC, I felt like I had, strong opinions on how things should be done. Doesn't necessarily mean it was wrong, right? But it's just like, from a personal perspective, it was hard to get behind that. And so next, right, which I think it kind of dovetails into the first item here, but like struggled to kind of subscribe to leadership's vision. Kind of to reiterate, right, like, senior engineers or senior plus engineers, right, you've been around the block a few times, kind of some things, even from a managerial or process perspective, that works or doesn't. And so, you have strong opinions. And so, and it's not to say that like a current vision, at least in my time here, was wrong or incorrect, right? It's just that we had, differences of opinions, right? And of course, you share, right, your reasons for having those differences of opinions, but ultimately, in order to have a good team, right, even if you disagree, you need to commit and do your job, which I did, but, internally, like I felt like there could be some, differences for the better there. And then lastly here, right, kind of expanded my knowledge, my technical knowledge, and gained a little bit greater confidence in my technical skills. So like we talked about earlier, right, I was, started being insecure about my technical capabilities, went back to IC, got to do a lot of the things on the bucket list, right, that I had from a technical perspective. So like, diving into Kubernetes security and, building security tools for like public consumption, maybe even giving a few talks, on security stuff. That's all the stuff that I wanted to do as an IC that I didn't get a chance to do up until this point. But, before I took StubHub, it was very much of like, I kind of felt pretty okay, right, with my technical skills. Of course, there's always more to learn, but as far as like the the insecurity aspect is kind of like, well, good enough kind of thing. And so yeah. So let's take a look now at the, sorry, I went too far. So what I ended up finding, right, after I had some time to kind of reflect after going to StubHub was that I think in reality what I really wanted was just the ability to make the greatest impact possible at the organization I was at. And so that's why it kind of fluctuated back and forth. So, if I was in the IC role, I felt like I had some opinions that, in my opinion, was going to be, it was going to help the organization quite a bit. And then when I was in a managerial side of things, right, the flip side happened, right? It's like, I should get back on keyboard because I feel like I would have more of an impact there. But that kind of brings us to this IC versus, leadership kind of dilemma. And again, this was like, I distilled this after actually having a second to breathe and reflect on, my current journey so far. But kind of the main things that, I've kind of come up with, right, is that, ICs move to leadership for a couple different reasons, right? One of which is, desire for greater influence, right? You want to be able to, if you're a diligent, like, security practitioner, you want to secure stuff, right? Like, that's your job. And so you want to be able to do that in the most impactful way possible. And so, I've, based off of, my experience and talking to some other people, right, it seemed like the general theme was that there was, definitely a desire to have a greater influence. The next, right, differing perspectives on vision, right, as we kind of touched on earlier, right, you have to get your job done under the leadership that you have, but, you may not always agree, right, and so you kind of want to do it yourself. And there's that other notion, too, of like, career growth, promotion, compensation, right, that can tend to sometimes look better, right, on the managerial leadership side, which we know is definitely not always the case. But on the flip side of that, right, when ICs do move to leadership, right, leadership isn't always what is expected, right? I mean, I think generally speaking, those in the security industry do know that, like, if you're an individual contributor as an engineer and you go to a leadership role, chances are you have other responsibilities, and so you're going to be doing less technical work, right? And so I feel like that was a pretty eye-opening experience. Like, there's one thing to kind of know, and there's one thing to understand and a different thing to know, right, through experiencing it. And so, after that, there's, more meetings, more bureaucracy, people challenges, right? And so if you're not passionate about that, then it's just going to be, again, that you're back into that same place. And the next item here, right, is that, as an engineer, your success is going to be measured, or your performance is going to be measured on how good your technical output is, right? So did you write some code that, like, eliminated full classes of vulnerabilities across the organization, or, an architecture, right, that completely gets rid of those classes of vulnerabilities outside of your, in your organization. But as a leader, right, your success is now measured by your team's outcomes, and it's harder to get immediate feedback on that, right? So if you make a process change, or you reorganize, right, your organization, right, you might not be able to see the actual true effects of that until months down the line, right? You got to let it give it time to, like, brew and grow. You might not know, right, if that was a good decision until later on. So just something to note of there. And so here's, kind of where we get into, I'd say, the takeaways of my journey so far is, one of the reasons I wanted to do this particular section is to kind of, hopefully put some people at ease as far as, like, feeling like they're in, the security role displacement, right? They kind of are experiencing, like, a similar, I wouldn't say issue, but similar situation that I experienced earlier as far as feeling like you should be in the other role. So first item here is, I'd say fuel your passion, right? So as humans, right, we're going to do the best work if we're passionate about what we're doing. And, if we're not doing what we love to do, then you're just going to see a quality hit, right? It's pretty simple as that. I mean, sure, in comparison to your peers, it still might be good, but, like, yourself and your outputs, you're not going to be as happy. You're going to be less excited about what you're working on. And so next item here, right, is define your ultimate goal and then working backwards, right? So, if you're doing what you love and, everything's good, but you eventually want to make it to a different side of the track. So an example of this would be, your senior IC or even a junior IC, and you want to keep on doing IC work and being technical, and you want to keep on going up to that track, but you want to eventually move over to the managerial leadership side of things. Personally, I would treat it like a project, right? You want to define your end milestone, define your end goal, your problem statement, if you will. And then you'll define, right, the requirements of that. So what do I need to do to get to that CISO role or that VP of security, or, on the other side, even distinguished engineer, on the other side of the track, and then you work backward from that. So like, what do you have to do what milestones do you have to achieve in order to get there? So at least and I feel like for people with our brains in the, security community, at least, and on the technical side, right, having a systematic approach to approaching a problem can sometimes be helpful. And so just some thoughts there. And lastly, right, reassess often, right? So, you might have, defined your end goal, right? And you're executing on those intermediate milestones in order to get to your goal from a career perspective. But what happens if that no longer works for you anymore, right? So make sure that you allow yourself to reassess and don't hold yourself to that ultimate goal if it's not what you want to achieve anymore, right? So basically keep yourself agile and pivot. And then if you're completely unsure, just repeat the winding path and just know that it will be okay, right? There's no one way to do this. In order to do that though, right, to keep your options open, I think it's really important to kind of continually learn and hone your skills for the complementary skill set, right? So if you're an IC, and you eventually want to keep your options open to move over into the managerial leadership side of things, right? Sharpen your business logic, right? Maybe do some public speaking. Maybe, spend time trying to figure out how to simplify really technical security issues into, verbiage that, maybe not as technical people can understand, because that's going to be very important. Same thing goes with, on the managerial side of things, right? If you want to keep the door open to go back to, the individual contributor side of things, make time and invest in yourself to keep those technical skills sharp, right? If you, again, want that, that agility, right, to go back and forth. And of course, there's definitely a lot of asterisks in here, but I would say just as a summary here. So some hard lessons learned. So first one, if you're a leader and a managerial leader and you find yourself constantly like prescribing technical implementation details to your team, you're probably not ready to be a good leader, right? Or you don't trust your team enough in order to carry out what needs to be done. And so, and again, I think that just reflects on you as a leader and maybe needing to, build that muscle a little bit more, right, of hiring the right people. So, I have some anecdotes we can get into later on, but I don't think I have time to, but just one of the things that I've learned firsthand. Second item, so this is kind of, what I recently learned in my new role at StubHub is like, as a leader, you can't let perfection get in the way of progress, right? As technical people, we're very focused on getting things correct, right? From a security perspective and reducing risk. That perspective changes when you get to be a managerial leader, right? You can't over-index on one specific portion of the stack and making sure that that's completely dialed in and risk-free from a security perspective. If you are getting at least a little bit more secure every day, you're doing a decent job, right? You're coming in, you're making at least a positive impact. And also one person cannot secure an entire organization, so you have to prioritize and execute. Same principle goes with like smaller, leaner teams. Lesson 3 here, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Imposter syndrome doesn't go away, it just changes. So I know for me, originally it was, on the technical side of things, like, am I good enough from a technical side of things in security? Once it seemingly like I got a little bit comfortable in that area and I took on a new role as a managerial leader with more responsibilities, came back completely, right? Just in a different way, right? Like, asking yourself, am I the proper person to be leading this organization? Am I the proper person to be building this organization from scratch? But you got to learn how to deal with that. And the last item here, right, for lessons learned is that, if you're not passionate about nurturing your team's performance, you're not the leader that they deserve, right? In my opinion, a good managerial leader is someone that should be focused on mentorship and, growing, the IC's career goals, whether it's internally or even beyond the organization you're at, right? You're that person that's supposed to be there for them and be on their side. And so, I had firsthand experience on, reflecting back and knowing that I wasn't a great leader, in my opinion, at Hulu. And I've since learned from that quite a bit, and I've changed my perspective quite a bit. And so I think that's super important, I would say over-index on that key point if you're interested in becoming a managerial leader. But yeah, so, some closing remarks. Got the top 3 here. There's no one way to achieve your career goals, right? If you're interested in moving back and forth, keep yourself nimble, hone those complementary skill sets depending on where you are in the different tracks. And then, I guess that was 1 and 2. And then number 3, right, knowing when you're honestly ready to be a leader. And so, right, that's it's a role that has a lot of weight to it, specifically if you have people reporting to you. So make sure that you are ready to give, your individual contributors what they deserve, and making sure that you're ready for that, to take on that different role. But yeah, so I think we're just about at time here, so that's it.